Lesson 9. Have you ever noticed that mystery is all around you? Sometimes a good mystery that fills you with anticipation and excitement, and other times a mystery that might fill you with dread or worry. What will the weather be like tomorrow? Will the dentist find a cavity? Did I make the team? What will they think? With so much mystery and uncertainty, it is wonderful to know that there's one thing that never changes, and that's God's love for us. It's constant, unwavering, steadfast, and sure. Whether we are having the best day or the worst day, as children of God, we can count on His unconditional love. He's always there for us, even when we might not feel it. Just always remember that. The Bible assures us that nothing can separate us from God's love. Take a moment to read Romans 8:38-39 and discuss this passage. You could even look up songs that have been written to help you remember this verse. There are quite a few versions online. While God's love is certain, today's story is a mystery. We have learned how the first explorers came to the New World in search of wealth and a place to settle, with financial backing from Spain. We also learned how America received its name in honor of Amerigo Vespucci in 1507. But today we are going to fast forward in time just a bit. The British explore the New World. Reports of the discoveries that Columbus and Vespucci had made traveled quickly throughout Europe. It wasn't long before the British became interested in sailing west to claim land in America. In 1578, the first attempt for British colonization was made when Queen Elizabeth sent explorer Humphrey Gilbert across the Atlantic. While in search of a northwest passage to Asia, he was able to find a good location to establish a colony. Unfortunately for England, he was killed several weeks later when his ship, the Squirrel, sank on the return voyage to England. After this tragedy, Gilbert's half-brother, Walter Raleigh, took over the mission to explore and establish new colonies in America. In 1585, he landed in Roanoke and, with one primary task, set up a fort for the British so they could easily colonize the land. Little did he know this first landing in Roanoke would lead to one of the greatest mysteries of early American colonization. Meeting the indigenous Americans. Upon landing, the British made contact with two tribes of indigenous Americans, the Roanoke and the Croatian. Both tribes were friendly, and for the moment the relationship between them was positive. In fact, it was so positive that once the fort was built, two indigenous representatives, one from each tribe, agreed to return to England with Raleigh to help establish a good relationship. While in England, they met Queen Elizabeth and were given the English names Maneco and Wanchese. Problems in the New World. While everything was going well in England, back in the New World, the British and indigenous Americans were engaged in conflict. Both sides were guilty of repeatedly attacking the other, and things quickly got out of control. It was so bad that when another British ship was passing by, most of the colonists rushed to the ship for rescue. Unfortunately, they were in such a hurry that they left behind 3 of their men. And you should know, while in England, Manteo became the first indigenous American to be baptized. The first problem. When the British returned later in the year, they found the fort abandoned, and the 3 men had disappeared. Not wanting to lose the land, it was decided that 15 men would stay behind to guard the fort. Let's imagine you are one of these British settlers. The relationship with the indigenous tribes was no longer peaceful, and 3 of your men had disappeared. Would you want to stay behind? The men were given 2 years' worth of supplies, and then the ships left to return to England. About a year later, in 1587, Walter Riley returned to Roanoke with Governor John White. But this time, instead of bringing soldiers, they brought settlers. Over 100 men, women, and children all made their way to the New World to establish a colony. They arrived expecting to find the 15 men who had been left behind to guard the fort. However, upon landing, they discovered the fort had once again been abandoned, and it showed signs of damage. But there was even a bigger concern. The second problem. The 15 men who had been left behind were nowhere to be found, and there were signs that they may have been killed. There are several theories about what happened, but according to the Croatian tribe, the Roanokes had attacked and killed the men. Do you remember Manteo and Moachis, the indigenous Americans who voyaged to England? Well, Manteo maintained a good relationship with the British. It is said that Moachis saw them as a threat to his people and way of life. One theory even says that Moachis participated in the raid against the British men. In the end, this is only a theory, and we don't know what happened to the 15 British men. Can you explain having traveled all the way across the ocean, only to land and discover that the men that were there before you had likely been killed? Because of this fear and the obvious struggling between the British and indigenous Americans, Manteo continued to work hard to maintain a good relationship between the Croatian and the colonists. For a while, things seemed to be hopeful, but the colonists quickly realized they had arrived too late to plant crops. They were in desperate need of supplies and food, so Governor White journeyed back to England and promised to return quickly with everything they would need. Before leaving, White told the colonists that if they had to evacuate the colony because of an emergency, they should leave him a trail by marking X's on the tree. This way, he would be able to find them easily. Little did White know this would be the last time he would see his people. The third problem. Upon returning to England, White discovered that the British were on the verge of war with Spain. Because of this conflict, the ships were not able to return to the colony until 1590, 3 years later. When you have no food supplies and a fragile relationship with indigenous Americans, a lot can go wrong in 3 years. The big mystery. When Governor White finally returned to Roanoke 3 years later, there was no sign of life. The colony had been abandoned and was overgrown with weeds, indicating that the colonists had been gone for quite some time. As he explored the settlement, he discovered that tools and guns were left strewn on the ground, as though the people had left in a hurry. He also found the colonists' treasure chests dug up, and the contents were left scattered everywhere. White remembered what he had told the colonists before he left and began searching for the X markings on a nearby tree. What he found, however, were not X's. Instead, the colonists had carved the words Croatian and CRO into the trees, and even on the walls of the fort. Beyond that, there were no other clues. Over 100 British citizens had vanished, never to be heard of again. So what happened? There are several theories about the last colony of Roanoke. Disease. Many researchers believe that disease overtook the colony. Violence. Another theory is that they were a threat of violence from local tribes, and the colonists were forced to flee. Assimilation. A third theory suggests that the colonists were forced, whether due to lack of supplies, disease, or violence, to relocate and live with the Croatian. The theory suggests that they assimilated and became part of the tribe. Whatever the reason, we do know the colonists left in a hurry. What we don't know is where they went or why. There is hope, however, that they continued to live on. Remember how Governor White had asked them to carve the X in the tree to signal trouble and let them know where they had gone? Well, there were no X's, so the assumption by White was that there was no trouble. In fact, White believed that colonists had gone to live with the Croatians. He had planned to go and search for them, but an approaching storm forced him to return to England instead. Unfortunately, White became ill and died in England 3 years later, never able to return and find his people. Needless to say, the attempt to colonize the Roanoke did not go well. It is sad to think that over 100 people simply vanished with no record. The mystery will forever be known as the Lost Colony of Roanoke. And that is the end for Lesson 9.